I was driving back from a weekend trip to visit some friends in the next town over. It was supposed to be a relaxing little getaway, but as always, I lost track of time and ended up leaving way later than planned. By the time I hit the road, it was already dark, and the highway was pretty much deserted. Just me, my car, and the long, winding road ahead. I wasn't really worried at first. I had my music on, a few snacks, and I was just cruising along, thinking about the fun weekend I'd had. But then I noticed my gas gauge was getting dangerously low. You know that sinking feeling when the needle starts creeping towards E? Yeah, that. I realized I hadn't filled up before leaving town, which was a rookie mistake, especially on a stretch of road like this. There weren't many gas stations along the route, and the ones that were there usually closed early. So I started to get a bit nervous. I mean, I've heard stories about people getting stranded on these kinds of highways, and it's not something you want to experience firsthand. I kept driving, keeping an eye out for any sign of a gas station. After what felt like forever, I finally saw one up ahead. It was this tiny, old-looking place, kind of run down, with just a single pump out front. But at that point, I didn't care. I just needed gas. I pulled in, and the place was completely deserted. Not a single car in sight, and the store itself looked dark. The only light was from the neon open sign flickering in the window. I figured maybe the attendant was just in the back or something. I parked by the pump and got out of the car, shivering a little as the cold night air hit me. I walked up to the store, peering inside to see if I could spot anyone. The place was a mess, shelves half empty, dust everywhere, and there was this weird smell, like something had gone bad. I hesitated for a second, but I really needed that gas, so I pushed the door open. It creaked loudly, echoing in the stillness. Inside, it was even creepier. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered every now and then, casting eerie shadows across the room. There was a counter at the back with an old cash register, and behind that, a door leading to what I assumed was a back room. I walked up to the counter, trying to look calm, even though my heart was racing. I rang the little bell on the counter and waited. No answer. I rang it again, a bit harder this time. Still nothing. I called out, "Hello? Anyone here?" But my voice just seemed to vanish into the emptiness of the store. I felt this uneasy chill creep up my spine, the kind you get when you feel like you're being watched. I glanced around, looking for any sign of life, but there was nothing. Just rows of dusty shelves and that door behind the counter, slightly ajar. I thought maybe the attendant was in the back, so I leaned over the counter and called out again, louder this time. "Hello, I need some gas." Still nothing. Just silence. I was about to give up and leave when I heard a faint rustling sound coming from the back room. It was so soft that I almost thought I imagined it, but then I heard it again, like something or someone was moving around back there. My heart started pounding in my chest. I stood there, frozen, my eyes glued to that door. I couldn't see anything, just darkness beyond the crack, but I could feel something, a presence, like someone was standing just out of sight, watching me. I took a step back, every nerve in my body screaming at me to get out of there, but I couldn't move. It was like my feet were glued to the floor. Then, out of nowhere, the door creaked open a little more. Just a tiny bit, but enough to make me jump. I saw a sliver of the room beyond, but it was too dark to make out anything. I was holding my breath, waiting for something to happen, for someone to come out, but nothing did. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. "Hello?" I called out again, my voice barely more than a whisper now. "Is someone there?" Silence. Not even the rustling anymore. Just this thick, suffocating silence that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I was about to turn and run when I saw it. Movement. Just the slightest flicker of shadow in the doorway. My heart skipped a beat, and I stumbled back, almost knocking over a display of snacks. That's when I saw it. A face. Pale, gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to stare right through me. It was only there for a second before it vanished back into the darkness, but it was enough to make my blood run cold. I turned and bolted for the door, my heart pounding in my ears. I burst outside, the door slamming behind me, and ran to my car. My hands were shaking so bad that I fumbled with the keys, almost dropping them. I glanced back at the store, half expecting to see that face staring at me through the window, but there was nothing. Just the darkened gas station, as empty and lifeless as before. I finally managed to get the door open and jumped in, locking it behind me. I started the engine and peeled out of there. tires screeching on the pavement. I didn't stop driving until I was miles away, my heart still racing. I ended up finding another gas station, one that was actually open and had people around. I filled up there, trying to calm myself down and convince myself that what I saw back at that other place was just my imagination, or maybe a trick of the light. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. I knew what I saw. To this day, I don't know what was in that gas station. I've driven that route a few times since then, but I've never seen it again. It's like it just vanished. Or maybe I've just blocked it out, refusing to look too hard in case I see it again. That face, those eyes. It's one of those experiences that sticks with you, you know? Makes you second guess yourself. Wonder if maybe you were just seeing things. But I know what I felt that night. That cold, creeping terror that wraps around your heart and squeezes. That feeling of being watched, of something not quite right lurking just out of sight. Now I make sure to always have a full tank before I hit the road, especially if I'm driving at night. And if I ever do have to stop, I make damn sure it's at a busy, well-lit place, because you never know what's out there, in those dark, lonely places, waiting, watching, and sometimes it's better not to find out. Alright, so this happened a couple of years ago, and it still gives me the creeps when I think about it. It was late at night, maybe around 2 a.m., and I was driving back home from a friend's place. We had been hanging out, watching movies, and just chilling, so I didn't realize how late it had gotten. The drive back home was about an hour, and I knew I needed to get some gas before I hit the highway. I kept an eye out for a gas station as I drove through the dark, empty streets. There was almost no one around, which wasn't surprising for that hour, but it did make everything feel a little eerie. Finally, I saw a station up ahead, one of those small, independent places that you don't see much anymore. It wasn't well lit, just a couple of flickering neon signs and one lone pump under a dim overhead light. But it was open, so I figured it would do. I pulled in and noticed there were no other cars around, not even the attendant. That made me hesitate for a second. I mean, it's not like I was expecting a crowd, but the place looked almost abandoned. Still, I needed gas, so I parked next to the pump and got out. The air was cold, and there was this weird silence that hung in the air. It was like the kind of quiet you hear in movies right before something bad happens. I tried to shake off the feeling and walked up to the pump. I looked around for a moment, wondering where the attendant could be, but I couldn't see anyone. There was a small booth at the side, but the window was closed and the lights inside were off. I figured maybe it was one of those self-service places. So I swiped my card at the pump and started filling up the tank. As I stood there, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. You know when you just get that gut feeling like you're being watched? That's how I felt. I kept glancing around, expecting to see someone, but there was no one in sight. The gas pump was old and slow, and it felt like it was taking forever to fill up. I just wanted to get out of there as quickly as possible. While I waited, I heard a noise coming from the small convenience store attached to the station. It was a faint rustling sound, like someone moving around inside. I looked over at the store, but the windows were covered in dirt and grime, so I couldn't see much. The door was slightly ajar, and a small light was flickering inside. I told myself it was probably just the wind or something, but my curiosity got the better of me. I decided to check it out, thinking maybe the attendant was in there. I walked over to the store, the gravel crunching under my feet, and pushed the door open a little more. It made a loud creaking noise, like it hadn't been opened in a long time. The inside was dark and cluttered, with shelves full of dusty old snacks and drinks. It looked like no one had been in there for months, maybe even years. I called out, "Hello? Anyone here?" But my voice just echoed back at me. No response. I stepped inside, and that's when I noticed the smell. It was this weird, musty odor mixed with something else, something that made my stomach turn. It was faint, but it was there, lingering in the air. I took a few more steps in, my eyes adjusting to the dim light. The place was a mess, with stuff scattered all over the floor, like someone had gone through the shelves in a hurry. I was about to turn around and leave when I heard the noise again. This time it was louder, coming from behind the counter. My heart started to race. I didn't know what I was expecting to find, but every horror movie I'd ever seen was running through my head. I took a deep breath and walked up to the counter. There was a curtain hanging behind it, blocking the view to whatever was back there. I reached out and pulled the curtain aside, and that's when I saw him. There was a man crouched down, facing away from me. He was wearing an old, dirty jacket, and his hair was long and matted. He was muttering something to himself, words I couldn't make out. In his hand, he was holding a knife, the blade glinting in the dim light. I froze, my mind racing. I didn't know if he had seen me or if he was aware I was there. My instincts were screaming at me to run, but I couldn't move. I just stood there, staring at him, my heart pounding in my chest. Suddenly, he stopped muttering and turned his head slightly, just enough for me to see the side of his face. His eyes were wide and bloodshot, and he had this crazed look about him. That's when he noticed me. His eyes locked onto mine, and he gave me this twisted smile, like he was enjoying my fear. I snapped out of my paralysis and took a step back, my mind screaming at me to get out of there. He started to stand up, and I didn't wait to see what he was going to do next. I turned and bolted out of the store, my heart in my throat. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps quick and uneven, like he was stumbling. I ran back to my car, fumbling with my keys as I tried to unlock the door. I glanced back and saw him coming out of the store, still holding the knife, that sick grin on his face. I finally got the door open, jumped in, and locked it just as he reached the car. He pounded on the window with his fist, his eyes wild and his mouth moving like he was saying something, but I couldn't hear him over the sound of my own panic. I started the car and floored it, the tires screeching as I sped out of the gas station. I didn't look back. I just drove, my hands shaking on the wheel, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. It wasn't until I was miles away, back on the highway, that I finally started to calm down. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see him following me, but there was nothing. I drove straight home, not stopping for anything. When I finally got there, I parked the car and just sat there for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. My mind was racing with questions. Who was that guy? Why was he hiding at the gas station with a knife? What would have happened if I hadn't gotten away? I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? That I found some creepy guy in a gas station? I didn't even know where the place was exactly. It was just some random station I'd stumbled upon in the middle of the night. For days after that, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Every time I drove past a gas station, I would get this chill down my spine, like I was being watched. I kept replaying the scene in my head, that man's twisted smile, the glint of the knife in his hand. I knew I'd gotten lucky, that things could have ended very differently. I tried looking up the gas station online, but I couldn't find anything about it. No address, no mention of it on maps. It was like the place didn't exist. It was as if it had just appeared out of nowhere that night, like some kind of trap waiting for someone to stumble into it. I've told a few people about what happened, but most of them just think I'm exaggerating or making it up. But I know what I saw, and I know how close I came to something really bad. That night changed the way I look at things. I'm more cautious now, more aware of my surroundings, and I don't go to those old, isolated gas stations anymore. Not if I can help it. Sometimes I still think about that man and what he was doing there. Was he waiting for someone like me to come along? Was he planning something worse? I'll never know, and maybe that's for the best. But every now and then, when I'm driving alone at night, I can't help but feel that same sense of dread creeping up on me. I guess the moral of the story is to trust your instincts. If something feels off, it probably is. And sometimes the best thing you can do is just get out of there as fast as you can. Alright, so this happened about a year ago, and it's something I still think about every time I have to stop for gas late at night. It was one of those days where nothing seemed to go right, you know? Work was a mess, and I ended up staying way later than I planned. By the time I got on the road, it was already past midnight. I had about an hour-and-a-half drive home, mostly through rural back roads. I was about halfway home when I noticed my gas light come on. Great. I had been so busy with everything else that I completely forgot to fill up before leaving work. I checked my GPS to see if there were any gas stations nearby, but, of course, in the middle of nowhere, my options were limited. The nearest one was about 10 miles away, so I just hoped I'd make it without running out. After what felt like the longest 10 miles of my life, I finally saw the glow of a gas station sign up ahead. It wasn't one of the big chain ones, just a small, independent place that looked like it hadn't been updated in decades. The sign was flickering, and the whole place just gave off this eerie, run-down vibe. But at that point, I didn't care. I was running on fumes and just needed to fill up. I pulled into the station, and it was completely deserted. Not a single car in sight. There was a small convenience store attached to it, but the lights inside were dim, and it didn't look like anyone was there. I parked next to the pump and got out, trying to shake off this weird feeling that was creeping up on me. I swiped my card at the pump, but the screen was blank. No lights, no numbers, nothing. I tried again, thinking maybe it was just a glitch, but still nothing. Frustrated, I looked around for some kind of help button or intercom, but there wasn't anything. I was about to give up and get back in my car when I noticed a faint light coming from inside the store. I figured maybe there was an attendant in there, so I walked up to the store and tried the door. It was unlocked, which was a bit of a relief. I stepped inside, and immediately, this musty, stale air hit me. The store was small, cluttered with old snacks and drinks that looked like they'd been sitting there for ages. The light was coming from a small lamp on the counter, but there was no one behind it. I called out, "Hello? Anyone here?" No answer. Just the faint hum of the refrigerator and the flicker of the lamp. I was starting to get really creeped out, but I still needed gas. I walked up to the counter and looked around for a bell or something to get someone's attention, but there was nothing. That's when I noticed a door behind the counter, slightly ajar, with a staircase leading down. The light was coming from down there. I hesitated for a second, my mind racing with all the horror movie scenarios, but I really needed that gas. So I took a deep breath and stepped around the counter, heading toward the stairs. As I got closer, I called out again, "Hello, I need some help with the pump." Still no answer, just the creaking of the floorboards under my feet and the faint sound of something dripping. I couldn't tell what it was, but it was coming from downstairs. I started down the stairs, each step creaking louder than the last. The air got colder and damper as I descended, and that dripping sound grew louder. When I reached the bottom, I found myself in a small, dimly lit basement. It looked like a storage room, with shelves of old supplies and tools. There was a small puddle on the floor where the dripping was coming from, but I couldn't see where it was coming from. I looked around, but there was no one there, just boxes and shelves covered in dust. I was about to turn around and head back upstairs when I noticed something that made my skin crawl. There was a small door on the other side of the room, partially hidden behind a stack of boxes, and it was slightly open. I don't know why, but something about that door sent a chill down my spine. It was like every instinct in me was telling me not to go near it, but of course, curiosity got the better of me. I slowly made my way over, my heart pounding in my chest. As I got closer, I could see a faint light coming from the crack in the door. I reached out and pushed the door open a little more, peering inside. What I saw made my blood run cold. It was a small room with nothing in it except an old, rusty chair in the middle of the floor, and on the chair was a rope, tied in a loop, hanging from the ceiling. I backed away, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. What the hell was this place? Why was there a noose hanging from the ceiling? I turned to leave, but as I did, I heard a sound that made me freeze in place. It was a creaking sound, like someone stepping on the old wooden floorboards, but it wasn't coming from behind me. It was coming from upstairs. My heart felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. I listened, not daring to move, as the creaking grew louder. Whoever was up there, they were walking slowly, methodically, right over where I had been just a few minutes ago. I took a step back, my foot hitting something on the floor that made a soft clattering noise. The creaking upstairs stopped. I stood there, holding my breath, listening, and then the footsteps started again, this time heading toward the stairs. They were coming down. I backed up slowly, looking around for a place to hide. There was nothing but shelves and boxes. The only other exit was that small room with the noose, and there was no way I was going in there. I crouched down behind one of the shelves, my hands shaking. The footsteps grew louder as whoever it was made their way down the stairs. I peered around the edge of the shelf, trying to get a look at who it was, but the stairs were just out of sight. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs and stopped. I held my breath, my heart pounding in my ears. I couldn't see anyone, but I knew they were there, just standing at the bottom of the stairs, waiting. Then, in the silence, I heard a voice. It was soft, almost a whisper, but I could hear it clear as day. "I know you're down here." My blood ran cold. I felt like my whole body was frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe. The voice was slow, deliberate, and it sent chills down my spine. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't stay hidden forever, and I sure as hell wasn't going to reveal myself to whoever that was. I needed to find a way out, but the only way out was past the stairs. I listened as the footsteps started again, moving slowly across the room. They were heading toward the door I'd come through, blocking my way out. I had to move now, or I'd be trapped down there with whoever this was. I got up as quietly as I could and started creeping toward the stairs, keeping my eyes on the other side of the room where the footsteps had gone. I couldn't see them, but I could still hear them, moving around, shuffling through the boxes. I reached the stairs and started up, one step at a time, praying the old wood wouldn't creak under my weight. I was about halfway up when I heard the voice again, this time from right below me. "Where do you think you're going?" I bolted. I didn't care about being quiet anymore. I ran up the stairs, 2 at a time, my heart pounding in my chest. I burst through the door and into the store, not even bothering to look back. I ran to the front door and yanked it open, sprinting to my car. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them into the ignition. I finally managed to start the car and floored it out of there, not even looking back to see if anyone was following me. I drove for miles, not even caring where I was going, just wanting to get as far away from that place as possible. I eventually pulled over at a rest stop, my whole body shaking, trying to catch my breath. I sat there for a while, trying to process what had just happened. Who was that person? What were they doing down there? And what was with that room with the noose? I still have no idea. All I know is that I came way too close to finding out. Since that night, I can't bring myself to stop at those old, isolated gas stations anymore. I always make sure to fill up at a well-lit, busy place, even if it means driving a little out of my way. It's not worth the risk. Every now and then, I think about that voice, the way it sounded so calm, so sure, and I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't gotten out of there when I did. But honestly, I don't want to know.